Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today. We're going to get started in just another minute, give a few others a chance to join here, but thank you for joining us today. All right, well, we are just now getting started here. For those that are joining, we're going to give it just another 30 seconds or so, and then we'll get kicked off. All right. Okay, everyone, thank you so much for joining our webinar for today. Welcome. This is the strategic value of ESG materiality assessments, and it's a webinar hosted by Gobis. My name is Michelle Winters. I'm the VP of Solutions at Gobis and the moderator for today's webinar. So as we all know, investors are inquiring more and more frequently about what organizations are doing in regards to responsible investments, how you treat your employees and vendors, your dedication to sustainability initiatives, and other activities that are falling under that ESG umbrella. It's important to have answers to those questions, and it's a big world. A materiality assessment empowers you to easily report on your current state and outline what future initiatives will focus on while taking into consideration your business goals and risks. In our webinar, we're going to be discussing what an ESG materiality assessment is, what the benefits are for your organization, how the assessment supports sustainable investment strategies. So our team of experts will provide tips and best practices for the creation and implementation of what a successful ESG materiality assessment can look like. So today's session is going to run about 50 minutes in length, and then we're going to leave time for questions at the end. The webinar will be recorded and sent to all participants. But before we begin, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our team here. So speaking for us today, Kylie Ford is going to be kicking us off. She's our Gobis ESG consultant. She has over a decade of ESG management consulting program experience. She's an expert at bridging multiple roles and has worked with organizations of all sizes across all different sectors. And she's really focused a lot on employee engagement, strategic business development, and process improvements. And then we also have Mari Bishop. She's one of our ESG managers here at Gobis. We like to call her our change maker. She's got a rich background of program management, research, problem-solving skills, and leadership, of course. And she really enjoys bringing that extensive knowledge of broad range of skills to connect the environment to that responsible, healthy, and profitable development. So the last thing I'll mention is feel free to submit questions at any time throughout the webinar. You should be able to do so in the bottom right-hand corner. I'll be collecting those, and at the very end, we'll be sure to get through as many of those as we can. But with that being said, Kylie, the stage is yours.
All right, thank you, Michelle. So as Michelle had sort of teased, the first thing we're going to be discussing is what is a materiality assessment? Likely if you're here, you're listening, it's come up for you in some way. Maybe an investor has asked you to complete one. Maybe a peer of yours was bragging about having just done one. Or maybe you're in the midst of submitting a GRESB questionnaire and you want to see if you could get those extra points for next year. What would a materiality assessment look like? So simply put, a materiality assessment is a tool. It's used to both identify and prioritize ESG or environmental, social, and governance issues that are the most critical to your organization. And really, you can think of this more as an exercise in stakeholder engagement as well, too. It's designed to find the relative importance of those specific ESG or sustainability topics. So really what it means is that you look at a variety of sustainability topics, ESG topics, whatever they might be, and you think about it from two lenses. The first is the potential impact to your organization. So as an example, indoor plants are a sustainability topic or potential project that you might think about undertaking. What's the potential impact to your organization? Likely it's not going to be, a 10 on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of what could the change be. However, if it's something like a new regulation coming down or a new disclosure that you're going to be required to participate in, that could be hugely impactful. So it's just taking a variety of these topics and ranking them by relative importance. The second angle that you'd be looking at everything is the importance to each stakeholder. Just to pick on the indoor plants, example again, because it's easy to conceptualize, maybe you don't think it's that impactful, but if employees really, really care about indoor plants, that could be a quick win for you to consider looking at. And by looking at these, I should also back up and say potential impacts can be both positive and negative. So if you're looking at a particular sustainability topic, it's not just, oh, this is a risk that's floating out here in the future, or we need to act on this or else our employees will be sad at our lack of office greenery. It could also be an opportunity. Maybe new talent would be attracted to some of these items that you'd be undertaking. So that's really what we mean when we say impact. And then understanding the importance to each stakeholder is really the key aspect of materiality assessments. And that's also why it's important to have a broad range of stakeholders. So when we talk about stakeholders to your organization, the identification of them is just as critical as anything else. You might immediately be thinking, okay, employees, board members, investors, possibly suppliers and distributors as the stakeholders that you normally would engage with. But it can be broader than that too. It could be local community members or even broader community members, maybe an NGO or another advocacy group, industry trade groups, things like that. And the more interviews you conduct with these stakeholders and the broader a spectrum of opinion you get on it, the more you can help position exactly how your company is doing, both from the perception of the stakeholders involved and where you could angle towards for your ESG actions in the future. So why do you need a materiality assessment? Well, I'm already talking it up. So let's dig into a little bit of what those specifics are. For one, it's really a guide for all of your ESG or sustainability strategy and communication. You could even think of it as a blueprint. It really tells you here are the items that we need to be focused on. And why is that? Well, because it makes the business case inherently for the projects that you might be undertaking. Again, to the indoor plants, maybe you just don't care about it that much, but if you see employees really, really like it and you present that to upper management, they're probably going to want to act on something more than, another item that maybe employees could be more tepid about. So that's just one item of it, and especially it can help make the business case for more costly endeavors. Maybe you want to get your headquarters LEED certified, for instance. Well, if that's something that potential investors would be attracted to, if that's something that would have a positive effect on the local and community, and if that would help the comfort of your employees and attract new talent, then that makes an easy case, even though there is a cost associated with that project. So you can leverage the results of your materiality assessment to help achieve support for whatever that ESG program might be. Next, it informs communication strategies. Maybe you find out that board members really care about one item, but employees care about another, and the public cares about a third thing. Well, your internal and external communication can be tailored specifically to the needs of these groups. At your next board presentation, you can lead with the ESG items or initiatives that you think are going to capture their attention the most. The same goes for company newsletters. Really get people engaged with your program by showing that you care what they care about too. So just that sort of inherent ability to enhance your marketing strategy surrounding all ESG efforts is one of the biggest benefits of a materiality assessment. Getting ahead of long-term risks. Those of us in the sustainability world are very familiar with, the quadrant of is something important versus urgent or not important, not urgent, right? And when we talk about this in general to sort our work, we try and focus on important and urgent. And we know that a lot of sustainability topics are important, but not immediately urgent. Think things like climate change adaptivity or a new regulatory risk. Maybe there could be a regulatory change, but that's not going to come tomorrow. It's going to come down the road. So how do you prepare for those things that are very, very materially important, but not present at the moment? And that's exactly what a materiality assessment will help you do. Because by ranking the impact, the potential impact to your business, it just automatically elevates and kind of lets it rise to the surface that this is something that you should be focused on. And you'll also know exactly what it is that your stakeholders are caring about with regards to those longer term issues. So it helps you to be more strategic in your general ESG approach rather than tactical as things are coming at you. The next is that by doing this, by looking at these long-term risks, you're identifying ESG trends. You're seeing the direction that things are going. Something that an investor cares about today in 2020 is very different than what investors were asking about in 2010, when ESG was sort of this new hot button issue. And you'll get to see that. And the more interviews you do, the more stakeholders you bring into your materiality assessment, the broader a picture it paints of what those ESG trends are. Finally, and perhaps most obviously, but still definitely worth a focus, is that you are able to meet ESG reporting expectations of your stakeholders. Any kind of disclosure that they want to see. Sometimes it takes these conversations to know, oh, we actually should be publishing our energy footprint every year because that's something our board does care about. That's something our investors do care about. Or maybe it could even encourage you to participate in a reporting or disclosure mechanism for the first time you hadn't considered. Something like doing a GRESB assessment, which has become more of a concern for some groups of stakeholders. So just going through this process, being able to align yourself with what the expectations are and bridge that gap will help you craft a truly strategic ESG strategy. So let's talk just a little bit more about the current ESG trends in materiality and just the trends in general, because those of us in ESG, we know it's a shifting area. There seems to be a different focal point. I don't know, almost every 5 years something becomes really hot. And in general, 2020 is a year unlike any other that we've ever seen. So it might seem like things have been thrown out, the playbooks are being completely rewritten, but the good news is that those of us staying along with ESG trends, participating in more strategic projects like materiality assessments, this actually comes hand in hand with what's going on right now. And what do I mean by that? Well, employee and community health in particular, along with business continuity plans and overall resilience of businesses, have become a hot button issue. And we've seen this developing the last 2 years, but especially now, especially where we are, it continues to be the trend that we're seeing over and over again. You can even look at this on an asset level. There are more and more Fitwell certifications and WELL certifications, not just that Gobi oversees, but in general in this current environment that buildings are pursuing. And for anyone who doesn't know what Fitwell and WELL are, these are building health certifications, things that look at asset levels on a basis of how healthy is it for the tenants? What's your proximity to local transportation? Are there healthy options in the vending machines? Items that maybe in 2010, if you had said, hey, this is a really important sustainability topic, no one would have paid attention to you. However, now it's becoming a chief concern because you're looking at your ESG impacts and really looking how to elevate things in that S sector, which has for a few years felt a little bit underdeveloped for some. You're also seeing more of a focus on these overarching strategic plans that tie into business continuity plans, climate action plans. You've probably heard TCFD reporting come up, which is the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. It means that there's more of a focal point on these longer-term risks that are coming down. None of us ever thought we were going to have to create business continuity plans surrounding a pandemic until we had to create business continuity plans surrounding a pandemic. The same is true for if and when there are effects of climate change that could disrupt our business, whether it's more extreme weather patterns or even needing to move office locations entirely. So it's something to stay ahead of and something that materiality assessments can help pinpoint for you. Finally, we're seeing this rise in more financial financial focus of your ESG work, I should say. Things like responsible investments, accounting standards such as SASB have also become more and more in the conversation. Maybe UN PRI signatories, that's something that more and more organizations are looking at. And this goes hand in hand with climate readiness. Truly making sure that your actions as an organization are sustainable all the way through, not just on the resource management side of things, making sure your waste is looking good, making sure your energy is going down, but on your investments. Materiality assessments are now inclusive of these topics, and they can help orient your organization within how important they are to your stakeholders and the need for any potential action. So to talk about how to be able to leverage that stakeholder interest with investors, I'll turn it over to Mari.
Thanks, Kylie. So you heard about what it is, you heard about what, why it might matter. to go about, going down this path of a materiality assessment. Perhaps your investors have been asking for it by name, but most likely they've been asking for it in some other ways. So I just wanted to go over a few of the things that we've seen investors asking for from our clients, and kind of what we see the market, the investors from within the market asking for. So I'll divide it into kind of 3 categories. The first one being framework alignment. So this takes the shape of science-based, global finance, investment-focused framework alignment. So Kylie talked about a couple of those, but they can be different depending on who the entity is, who the organization is, what your goals are, and your overall structure. So it can be science-based targets, Paris Agreement goals, which tend to be a little more global, UN Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, which you probably have heard about, or other more global frameworks like GRI reporting, PRI, TCFD, SASB, CDP, a lot of acronyms, and ideally you want to make sure that through doing a materiality assessment that you are taking time to see what's out there, making sure that there is an alignment with what you are trying to achieve, what works best for your organization, because investors are asking for it, because it's the best for you down the path. And also make sure that a lot of these kind of complement each other. A lot of them might be a little bit of overlapping, so make sure that you choose the right ones when you're going down the path of framework alignment. The second one being stakeholder engagement. So the second category is in a way a continuation of the first one with the initial step, with that initial step of figuring out what frameworks you want to align to first, and then adding that additional step of disclosure and engagement of different stakeholder groups. So depending on the organization and depending on what you're trying to align to, you might want to engage, at different levels, your employee base, your customers, and even taking it a little step further for the supply chain or the community. The investors right now are asking for transparency and engagement when doing this step. So increased reporting and disclosure, definitely a big one. Focus on more transparent, best governance standards. So the idea of aligning to all these things that are kind of standard, but also taking it a step further, because you want to make sure that you stay ahead of the market trends, and also being transparent about it. So putting it on the website, or even making sure that you remain very engaged with your investors and you are keeping them in the loop of how it's going, what you're going after, how far you are from achieving it. Employee and health and well-being, definitely a big one that is going, it's coming across from all industries. As we get more into this, especially now that we're all kind of doing this work from home and possibly hybrid, what is that going to look like? Being always on, because you have, the internet anywhere you are, you're working, making sure that there's that, work-life balance, and that you keep the employees engaged, that you keep your one of your most valuable assets from in the company. Definitely very important. And lastly, like I mentioned, engaging supply chains, contractors, communities, those kind of third level engagement, which will look very different depending on what you're trying to achieve. But definitely a very important point if you're trying to be resilient and you are trying to stay ahead of risks in general. And lastly, the third category is kind of contained within the 2 others, but this one is just talking about the data, the metrics, the plan, and the structure that build on a sustainable business strategy. So like every other sound approach, data analysis and tracking needs to back up strategic growth. So making sure that you have those metrics very well defined, that you have a system in place to keep track of them, and have also a process to make sure that you can adapt, be flexible, and shift gears depending on changes that happen throughout, and so that you stay relevant with market changes as well, of course. And here we're seeing performance tracking being a big component of it. So that can be, ESG, environmental, social, and governance for performance tracking. It can look at quantitative and qualitative aspects. We're also looking at efficiency and performance of assets, so the more technical basis. Big points here is looking at assessments that kind of look at that asset level engagement and realizing that there's no one size fits all. Risk-based business strategy. So again, going back to making sure that you are prepared for risks, that you recognize what those can be, and that there is a very strong focus to be risk prepared for everything that your business is planning on doing short-term and long-term. And lastly, greenhouse gas emissions reduction. This is definitely gaining more momentum as we go. I think it's also very easily, we're finding it that it's can be very easily coupled right now with, a big aspect that's coming up from this whole pandemic, which is indoor air quality, or just air quality in general. Attaching that to your carbon emissions strategy can definitely be a good opportunity to, tackle two birds, one stone. Definitely something that investors are asking for, especially if your organization is more global, and in, we have kind of different places. The European Union, for example, has very increasingly more strict mandates around GHG emissions planning. And okay, there we go. So next, I wanted to cover who needs to be involved and when. I think this is a pretty common question that we get anytime an organization, a client approaches us. They want to learn more about, I want to do this. I want to, strategize how it's going to look like, how to go about it. But first, who do I need to loop in and when? How is this engagement going to look like? They want to make sure that they have a good approach to and be able to set expectations from within their teams. So number one, we want to make sure, as very first step from the stakeholder engagement portion, that you identify your goals. That step involves corporate leadership. It involves ESG leadership. It can look a little different depending on how your organization looks like. Sometimes it can be, the corporate members. It can be more into the entity or the fund level, or a mix of both. So corporate operations, senior team members, members of an ESG or sustainability task force or group, if there is one, or it's about to be formed, if you know who those people are probably going to be. Members of corporate ownership from the ESG team, members of corporate ownership, senior team members. So it's a mix of, this would be kind of the main decision makers, the ones that you want to make sure you engage. So everything else that you do moving forward is aligned with where you want to end up. Once the goals have been identified, key stakeholder groups can be ascertained, as well as, depending on the nature of the goals and the organization's governance structure, will be expanding the group that we are engaging. So we'll introduce to key stakeholder groups and draft topics. So here's when you already know what you want to achieve. Now you want to make sure that you understand the baseline. You want to understand what everybody is kind of looking for, or what they think is material, what they think is the most important, needs to be prioritized, or even where where these different groups think the organization is at. Most of the time you'll realize that they're not one and the same, which is why you do this exercise. You want to make sure that you gather all of these different points of information. And for this group, you'll be looking at engaging regional operational planning leadership. So for real estate, this can be portfolio managers or directors, asset group managers or directors, and engineering directors. You'll also be looking to engage departmental leadership, such as employees, so HR, or community partnerships leadership, anything that's customer-centric as well, to make sure that you understand from those leaders, from those points of view, what is material from their point of view. And lastly, business development or acquisition team leaders, which is of course very important in the form of where the business is growing into, or what the business is, continuously acquiring for, or the strategies or the processes that go into acquisition and growth. You want to make sure that you involve those groups as well at this stage. And lastly, you introduce a draft of the general goals and align with the rest of the organization. At this point is where you kind of get a little broader, a little boots on the ground, the people that are really gonna be taking this concept and implementing it, making it a reality. The people that moving forward after the materiality assessment are going to be tracking the different steps towards the final goal. So this can include management and analytic teams. So anybody from within the asset management team. Sometimes if you have, let's say, an ESG analysts, or you have financial analysts, or other people that would be really important to kind of make sure that they are on the same page and they understand what the goal of the exercise is. They can give their input into what they're seeing as well. And also organizational partners, especially if one of your goals and some of your important goals that you have identified through the exercise have to do with engaging that kind of third level of community, supply chain, so on and so forth. You want to make sure that you engage some of those key organizational partners as well. So now that we've talked about who needs to be involved and when, I just wanted to quickly show you how a use case would look like. So this is a sample of the summary, the graphic summary of what the ultimate result would look like. So in here, it doesn't have to look exactly like this. Of course, you want to make sure that you make it work for what you need, but usually has to do with an X and a Y axis is looking at how important it is to stakeholders versus how much it impacts the company's success or the company's ultimate goals. Through the exercise, you identified all of these different opportunities, goals, or just subjects that are material to the business. You'll put them along in this chart. Of course, the rest of the report really breaks it down into what it means, how it's going to look like, how you're going to track it, who's involved, and all of that. So to get into a little more specifics, we prepared a couple of use cases, exciting stuff, calling it company A and company B. So for company A, we have company A approaching us. Their whole idea around materiality is they think they already do some ESG already, but they feel like it's all over the place. They aren't sure what their baseline is, what they have, what they're actually doing, if it counts, and they don't know where to go from there. So this one's quite common. It usually happens when you have already been engaging and have already been doing some things towards ESG strategy, but you don't have an actual system in place. So you want to kind of start having a system in place and really creating this timeline on how to get there. So materiality definitely can help you get there. Step one, we would be assessing existing policies, strategies, initiatives. So of course, we want to know where company A is at. We don't want to duplicate efforts. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. We don't want to overwrite things that might already be working quite well. But we also want to know what is there that we can just take and run with, grow it, or what's just not there and we need to start from scratch per se. So this can look like looking at existing policies, looking at existing initiatives, or plans for upcoming policies and initiatives. Then we'll move into identifying and engaging those key stakeholders. So that kind of step that we just went through before. At that point, we should be able to understand current and needed growth in ESG topics, meaning we know where we're at, we know what we have, now we know what's important for our stakeholders. We've gathered up those different points of views. Where are we then exactly metrics-wise, and what do we need? Where's the gap between what's already there and what people are saying is material? We'll aggregate those insights. So this is where you start really prepping that report that really outlines all of the different findings that you've encountered so far, and start identifying next steps. And you make sure you compare it against existing strategies. So I mentioned that at the very beginning. Perhaps it's not something that's fully, completely in place and documented, but it's something that you were already planning on doing within the year, or something like that. You just released, your CEO just released a letter, committing to something specific that has to do with, ESG strategy. You want to make sure that everything that you just got out of the door or you're planning on getting out of the door does not collide with what you have found so far as you aggregate the insights. Then the next step would be to identify opportunities and plan implementation of those opportunities. So now you know what's there, you know what is needed to get to where you want to be, and you make sure that it aligns with anything else that is part of your existing strategy. Then next step is, okay, so these are the exact steps that these teams along this timeline should be implemented moving forward. Once we know what those action items are, very important, you should be selecting a system to track performance. So how are we gonna track how far we are to the goal? How are we going to, and that can be quantitative and qualitative metrics. And also kind of setting up a system, like I mentioned before, to make sure that you remain flexible and then you can quickly shift gears as needed. We'll set goals and the timeline for implementation. Make sure that you convey that to all of the teams that will be part of the implementation moving forward, that they agree, and you launch. For company B approaches us and says, our company doesn't know much about ESG, nor have we purposely been growing around it. However, we have received sudden immediate demand to jump on board with it from our investors. Well, first of all, this is something that I always like to say whenever a client approaches us saying, we've done nothing for ESG, we have nothing going on for that. Chances are you do. There's gotta be something. We will find it and we'll make sure we grow from there. So step one, indeed, finding what you do have in place. Perhaps it doesn't have ESG on the title, but most definitely can be tied one way or another. Let's see what's there. Let's see what it could look like if we grow it from there, or do we want to just scratch that off and do something else that gets us on the right foot for starters. We'll identify and engage as key stakeholders again, just like before, but this time around, we might want to also make sure that we are doing a bit of an ESG 101. Chances are, if the client thinks they haven't really been doing anything ESG related, the rest of their team is also not very attuned with the concept. So before we start reaching out to all of these stakeholders and asking them questions and throwing different definitions and concepts at them, we want to make sure that everybody's on the same page. They understand why their company is going after this idea, why it matters for what they do on an everyday basis and for the future of the business. That can be coupled with that identification and reaching out to stakeholders. We'll then move to the next step to understand the current needs around ESG topics. So by then you should have mostly everybody kind of on the same page and understanding what they have identified as material. So you can start identifying then what the next steps are, what needs to be done. We'll aggregate those insights, compare it against the existing strategy to make sure that there's no overlaps or conflicts, identifying opportunities, planning implementation. But in this case, because company B has not been purposely per se pursuing ESG growth, we also want to make sure that we take some time to create a strong baseline. So depending on the organization at this point, we might want to first take a step back and make sure we gather enough data, enough information, pilot some programs or initiatives before we jump into, okay, this is how the next 5 years is going to look like, and this is how we're going to implement all that. Otherwise, the rest of the steps are pretty similar to company A. Ultimately, depending on the timeline and the aggressiveness of how fast do you want to get to this ultimate ESG, this is how I want my company to do ESG in 5 years, 10 years, 3 years. Like I mentioned, we might want to first focus on a strong baseline before we get too aggressive and try to get all the way to the end. Okay, and if anybody has any questions, this is the time.
So thank you both, Mari and Kylie. So I've been getting a couple of questions here as you guys have both been speaking, and I think this is, if nothing else, we want to make sure this is informative and to share back with everyone that's attending, and we're hoping to get through as many questions as we can, and then can always follow up directly with you as well. Our contact information is here below. We give it freely. Please reach out to us. We would love to talk to everyone directly, but for the larger group that is also on the call, so one of the things that kind of called out to me as a couple of questions that we were getting is associated with more times financial performance. So, we frequently see that a lot of decisions come down to the financial performance, the dollar value, so to speak. We think that it's incorporated in a lot of components. But could, Kylie, maybe I'll toss this one to you first. Can you talk a little bit more into the alignment that we're seeing between financial performance and these ESG initiatives? And even specifically, if I can combine a couple of questions here together, is there certain evidence that we've seen that's leading to this increasing revenue potentially, or even specifics that you've seen that have had the highest impact associated with that financial performance?
Sure. Yeah, this comes up, I'd say, almost with every single client that I've ever worked with, simply because you always want to make sure that that you are getting that dollar investment when you're taking on these bigger projects, and when you're taking on ESG in general. It's an investment in personnel and in maybe third-party consultants, whomever you might be bringing in for something like this. So, yes, the simple answer is yes, we do see an alignment with engagement with ESG and positive financial performance. It used to be a lot easier to sort of visualize, because a lot of the focal point had been on reducing your environmental footprint, things like being more energy efficient, using less water, increasing your recycling streams, which can actually make you money. So when we looked at material, efficiency, that's kind of the obvious, you get a return on investment, and we could even calculate out for you, if you replace this HVAC system, then in 8 years, this is exactly when it will become profitable, things of that nature. When we're talking about really all the topics that materiality can encompass, and it could be everything, it could even be risks that never come to fruition, just depending on how those risks are ranked. That's when things get more amorphous. It's not to say that we're not seeing a payoff, but it's just more difficult to capture in terms of, here is your break-even point. I think the biggest evidence we've seen, God, there's like a 2015 Harvard study on this that showed that it leads to more engagement with stakeholders, and that there's a reputational increase for a company, and that's a big one too. It truly depends on the nature of the company's environment, what the market is. Things that direct consumers might look for instance, are going to be more stringent even than maybe other businesses that are relying more on responsible investments and things more of that. So you'll see, like fair trade stamps on ice cream, and that has a direct correlation with more consumers being willing to buy it, being willing to champion whatever ice cream brand this may be. I'm just thinking of Ben and Jerry's, because that's one of my favorite like B Corp sustainable corporations to always use it as an example. But in general, focusing on ESG and just having that framework, it allows you to sort of have that higher level of operational management. And I don't just mean in the sense of resource management, but looking at all aspects of your operations. And that's what we're talking about with, getting ahead of those ESG trends and spotting those long-term risks. So maybe I won't be able to promise you a payback period, but I do promise you that having this focus on the things that are going to be coming down the road is important to you. And especially for anyone with investors need to know that they're putting money into people that have foresight in mind. And this is really where ESG can tap into it, in addition to the reputation of a company increasing with the more sustainable efforts that they have.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can even add to that slightly, in the sense that I think there's two components. There's a little bit of that, exactly what you said, the financial return of, by doing these things, I'm going to save costs on my energy consumption, water consumption. I think that's pretty well baked, and you can have a nice ROI on it. But more so, when you're looking at larger ESG strategies, they're not always a tangible ROI, but there are a lot of studies out there related to increased financial performance that align with ESG initiatives, to exactly what Kylie was indicating. And investors are seeing this, and investors want to put more money into those ESG funds for all of those reasons that Kylie was indicating. So it's a little bit maybe less ROI specific, but definitely high in impact for overall financial performance.
And just to add slightly to that too, a lot of the examples that we gave within this for what sort of topics you might be focused on for materiality are in the social realm. And keeping your employees happy, employee retention, that's a huge cost saver, because we know that it costs so much more to train up a new employee if you have higher turnover. So that's just one little element where I think I could point to and say, yes, there's your ROI, but in general, it is the more strategic viewpoint for your organization.
So we're going to all buy plants and keep our employees happy. Got it. And then
have you gotten the message that I want indoor plants when we go back?
No, that's perfect. Okay, so another kind of specific question. Mari, I'm going to toss this one over to you. As you were talking about stakeholders specifically, one question was just how do you recommend even selecting the stakeholders to reach out to, and what have you found to work well to increase participation and maximize that kind of meaningful input?
Sure. So I think those 3 steps that I mentioned, that very first one, finding those key decision makers, usually one or more of those are the ones who actually brought out the request of let's look into a materiality assessment. So usually it tends to be a lot easier to engage people at that level. Once you get to level 2 and 3, it really depends. Ideally, everyone will be very excited to participate, and you can easily get everybody on the phone, and we can all talk about this. And but chances are, that there might be some people who just don't see the value as much as you might be seeing it. And in those cases, really very important to make sure that you, and something that we definitely do when we are stepping into that level, make sure that you are changing and adapting your communication piece, when you first reach out or when you're telling them about the exercise, so to make sure that it matches what their interests are. So kind of speak their language. Very different if I approach the director of engineering for, the North America assets for company A, it's going to look very different than if I approach the HR director. Of course, they'll kind of be, different backgrounds, different things the issues that they're dealing with every day on an everyday basis, different things that they're being requested, that they're being asked for by leadership. So just making sure that you understand what leadership is asking from them, and making sure that your ask or your that initial reach out is speaking from that point. So that way you're kind of telling them, hey, I know that you got to do this thing, or that you're, having challenges, getting this or that done. Here's how this is going to help you. And, it doesn't have to be, let me give you the whole spiel of everything ESG there is to know. What I need from you is this, Mr. or Miss, Director of Engineering, is the technical aspect. I want to know, what the struggles are to, run your assets, at the top of the performance, and kind of tell them, talk about, what you can get out of it, because I know you're being asked for, Y and Z by the end of the year, or something like that. And to make sure that you get the most out of those communications, that definitely, I think something that has worked really well is make sure that they know ahead of time exactly what you're going to ask, that you give them enough background information. So when you start having that conversation, you don't have to use half of the time bringing them up to speed, and making sure that you're both talking, about the same thing. So that would change depending on company A or company B, right? For that company B, that would take the shape of, an ESG 101. And then after that, making sure that they have something that they can allude to as you're talking to them. But perhaps for company A, that's simply, okay, here's, a very thorough overview of what we're going to be talking about. Don't stray away from that informational piece, making sure that both of you are always on the same page as you're talking.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting too, I think this falls in line too. There was a specific question that was associated with that I think goes hand in hand with when you're beginning this materiality assessment and kind of almost the questionnaire and deciding what stakeholders to get involved and how you get responses back and what you do with those responses. So I thought this was really interesting, is that it specifically says, one thing that they've noticed is that employees are ranking specific issues high that they're maybe already addressing. And how do we, kind of take some of that bias out of our overall result of that materiality assessment? But I think this actually can be kind of answered with almost what you're talking about as part of this process. Is it is a communication, it is part of the different aspects, is also providing knowledge of what you're doing as an organization and how you can communicate back as well. I don't know if I'm going to just keep going back and forth, but Kylie, is there anything that you would maybe add to that or expand upon on what Mari was saying or I was just saying
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, we kind of talked about how this can help with communication strategies in terms of you can tailor to what people are interested in. But another big asset of a materiality assessment in general is that it points to these blind spots of where there may have been gaps in communication. So it's great that your employees care about things that you're already working on. It means you're pretty much there. You just need to be able to champion this more, make sure that that information is readily available on a forum where it's heard as well too. So that's just what I would add on. It's not just communication in terms of what to communicate, but how, and maybe evaluating current communication and where that can be improved.
Absolutely.
And also,
another question. Oh, go ahead, Mari.
Just one last quick comment from there. If that particular stakeholder is identifying something as very material and it's already in place, doesn't necessarily mean that that there's a gap in communication. It could also just mean you're doing good, continue to do so. It matters to people. Don't drop that off your strategy moving forward. Keep it on. Yes.
I like that as well. So a question I get asked a lot that sometimes I almost feel is a struggle to define to a certain extent is what this deliverable looks like. I know we've talked about this and you gave a few examples, Mari, and I know we indicate that it can be slightly different for each company in terms of what story they're trying to tell. But Mari, maybe if you can dive into that a little bit, like does this look like a report, a presentation? Maybe you can expand on that a little bit, what we typically provide.
Sure. So it looks like both, both a report and a presentation. But before I get a little bit more into that, I would like to say one thing that you might want to do, but I believe it might not be the right way to go about it, is to try to standardize it, to try to make it look like others that you've seen online, or this peer that has also done it. I want it to look exactly like that because I want to easily just compare apples to apples. Ultimately, you do this because your organization needs it, because you want to bring more value to your organization, the right value to your organization. So to that end, it needs to be customized, and it will be what you need it to be. It will be a report, it will be a presentation. I think just having this big document that no one really looks at, because you just kind of receive it and you don't know how to read it, you don't know kind of where should I be steering my my attention to, especially as it might be different depending on who's looking at it. So that's why it's important for us to make sure that there is a presentation component, to make sure that we are highlighting and giving the key information to the key people as they need to receive it. And then the report just takes place as it's for you to kind of reference as you move forward along the 3, 4, 5, 10-year plan to implement all those goals.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that helps even provide additional clarity there as well. So I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. And I thought this one was great as well, that builds a little bit off of what we were saying, Kylie, is the tracking and quantifying of some of those environmental data metrics is really easy. You can have a software, we track the energy, water, waste data. But what are some examples can you dive into on tracking and even quantifying some of those goals and targets under social and governance?
Yeah, it can be difficult, and it's really dependent on what sort of rises to the surface. Very easy quantifiable metrics are things, especially on the social side, you can track employee retention as a percentage. You can have goals set around, we don't want any more than 5% turnover, whatever it might be from year to year. So that's just a really quick one that comes to mind. But a lot of times it is hard to quantify what you're trying to do. So it's really about strategic goal setting in a way that's meaningful to your stakeholders. So it's not necessarily putting pressure on yourself that every single goal has to have a number behind it, but maybe you're trying to say, okay, we have the goal that in the next 3 years, we will have a due diligence policy, an overarching ESG policy, and some kind of newly updated corporate social standards, whatever it might be that you're doing. And yes, you can count 1, 2, 3. There's your policies, so that's kind of an easier way to get at it. But don't feel the pressure to really conform these social and governance goals into something that's so easily digestible. A lot of it might even be higher participation in employee engagement surveys. Maybe you're sending out surveys each year to see how happy your employee base is, and you just want more participation in it. Maybe you set a goal to have more feedback sessions with tenants or with community members, things like that. You can always put numbers behind it, but just increasing engagement, increasing your space out there, increasing the breadth of what your policies cover, that's usually a good first step to start at. So that's how I would look at it. What's going to be meaningful to your stakeholders, to your organization? Start with that, and then make the goals that work for you. And if there's numbers behind it, great. But it doesn't always have to be 20% reductions by 2030 or whatnot.
And I'll let you
things to have as well. Go ahead, Mari.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that at that point, answering those kinds of questions, that's where the framework alignment comes in really helpful. So one of the very first steps is, figuring out if and which frameworks you want to align to, and that becomes really, really helpful for you to know what metrics you're trying to track, what you're going after, and how you're tracking them. Because there's already this kind of blueprint that you want to fit in, that makes it easy for you to benchmark against yourself moving forward, and also to benchmark against your peers moving forward.
Absolutely. Well, I know we only have a couple more minutes here. One of the things that I saw as well in the notes isn't necessarily a question, but just like additional comments that I thought was really great to kind of add to our financial performance conversation that we were having a few minutes ago. But there's a lot of alignment now as well associated with, executive compensation, and it's based on share value. I thought that was another good reminder, and that we're also seeing a huge increase right now in showing companies with higher ESG ratings are showing more resilient stock values. And I think, this was also mentioned, especially during COVID. So I know we've been talking, Kylie, you mentioned a little bit in the world we are in today, and that if nothing else, it's kind of presented that this is why there's added value to ESG, is to think of a little bit of the unthinkable, having those business continuity plans in place, evaluating security measures, being able to take your company with a second's notice of like, okay, we're all now working from home, don't come back, and what does that mean for our organization, and just managing those risk assessments. So thought that was just another good thing to maybe realign or think about, of the constant changes that I think we'll see in ESG. But yeah, I mean, Mari or Kylie, anything else that you want to end on or mention? Otherwise, there's a few questions we didn't get to, but for all of those that asked them, I'll be happy to reach out to you directly as well. But yeah, ladies, anything else on your end?
Yeah, one thing I wanted to add is just don't be intimidated by the stakeholder interviewing process, and feel free to throw on people that you might think, maybe their perspective isn't the most important to our business. You'll be able to sort that all out when you get the results back, and you'll be able to know really what is meaningful and what's not. But just having a large diversity of views is I think where that becomes the most impactful. It's where the data becomes the most meaningful too. The more voices, the more that things would normalize around median distribution, for lack of a better term. But definitely don't be intimidated by that. People want to be able to give you feedback, and you'll be surprised how many people are engaged with the process once you get the ball moving.
Yeah, absolutely. Mari, anything else on your end? Parting thoughts?
Yeah, sure. I'll just add that, yes, the world that we live in now, there's definitely, I feel like, when we say that, we follow it up with something sad or, not necessarily good, but really I actively try to do this personally. There's so much opportunity that is coming out of the world that we live at right now. I can use one example of, one brand new client that we have that is jumping on a materiality assessment and other opportunities because she's been trying for a long time to get everybody on board. Now everybody is on board. It's like, okay, now everything is happening now while I have your attention. So while all of our attentions and are focused on this, which also means our investors, everybody's investors in general are asking for this a lot louder, a lot more often. This is the opportunity. This is the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And it's what we've hopefully presented to you is one way to go about diving into that in a strategic way to help you figure out those next steps on how to really move that forward within your organization. So we really appreciate everyone's time today. Thank you so much for joining. We'll be looking to send this presentation to all the attendees. You have our contact information below, and we look forward to having you join on the next one. Thanks everyone so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.